everyone. Welcome back to Medicine for These Times. I'm so happy to have my friend Michaela Carlin, the host of the Psychedelic Mom Podcast, here with us today. Hi, Michaela. So good to see you again.
Hi, Beth. It's so good to be here with you. So good to see you. It's been a while.
Yeah, I know. So let me tell people a little about you, and then we'll go into your work and your story. So Michaela is a thought leader and healer holding space for deep conversations and transformational ceremonial retreats. She's the host of the Psychedelic Mom Podcast and is dedicated to amplifying voices, tools, and wisdom to support individual and collective awakening and healing. She is a medicine woman combining therapeutic modalities and ceremonial practices for individuals, couples, families, corporations, and friend groups to heal. She is supported in her transformational work, world peace negotiators, global business executives, famous authors, and more. So psychedelic literally means soul revealing. And I give that emphasis, by the way, because a lot of people misunderstand psychedelic. Mm-hmm. The Psychedelic Mom Podcast is dedicated to the deep exploration of what it means to live a psychedelic life. Through conversations with leading scientists, authors, indigenous and courageous humans of all kinds, Michaela connects others to share personal stories, ancient wisdom, the latest science and technologies to awaken individuals and create a healing shift in society. So Michaela, it's really funny. We met, I think it was 3 years ago, like pretty much in 3 weeks from now.
Oh my God, really?
And I know, right? It seems like, wow, different world, right? But I never heard your whole story. I heard little bits and pieces. Mm-hmm. I know you've done a lot of really interesting work in the world. You know, you've raised a family, you discovered psychedelics and launched this podcast, and you and I were in a training program together. Mm-hmm. But I want to hear, your story, kind of like your upbringing and what led you on your career path, and how'd you get to where you are today, and where did psychedelics fit into all that?
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. The short version.
Just a little story. Yeah. I grew up not in, the 60s where psychedelics were considered somewhat normal. I grew up definitely in a time when psychedelics were considered to be like off limits, the say no to drugs error. And I definitely wasn't someone who experimented. I remember having you on my podcast and you talking about your early years and thinking, wow, like I did not have that experience. I think too, you grew up in California and I grew up in conservative New England. So, I was pretty much a rule follower. But I always did have some curiosity at a really young age. I was talking to my older brother recently that even young, we had these like deep existential conversations, like, what is this? Like, who are we? And I'm just even having the realization now. I went to a private girls' school in Providence, Rhode Island, and it was like non-denominational, but it had this like hint of Quakerism, and we had silent meetings every Friday where you would go and you'd sit quietly. And like in 6th grade from, high school. And it was interesting because back when I was probably 19, 20, I started meditating and it was considered like weird. I mean, it was like, what are you doing? And I didn't come from a Buddhist background. And now later, at this stage in my life, looking back at all the years that I've meditated, and even more now, deeply more into kind of non-dual practices and things like that, I realized that it really goes back to that practice young of just having to sit quietly. And so I was someone who had these questions. I got married really young. I was 23 when I got married. I had my first child at 24. Which is crazy now when I think about it. Now that my children are grown, I have 4 kids. And so I really went full into being a mom and like loved it. I think the other thing someone asked me about like presence, we were talking, I think it might have even been with Tony, one of our other friends, talking about like being in the moment and remembering back to like having a child was again one of probably the most captivating ways of becoming present. Like when you're with a baby, it's like the sensation of being with a child, like the touch, the smell, their little foot. And so I remember even being a mom with my first child, being like really slowed down, really present, thinking like the entire thing about being a mother was like beautiful. And then as kids get older, it gets challenging. And the more children you have, it becomes challenging. And all the while, I think one of the things that got me back, into psychedelics, unbeknownst to me actually, or the healing process of psychedelics, were things that I didn't even know, which was when you are a mother and you're in this process of raising children, at least I was, so this is not true for all mothers, there were aspects of myself I was losing. I mean, I was a mother of 4 children who were all different, who all had their needs. And somewhere along the way, I might have forgotten who I was in it all. I definitely had small entrepreneurial projects and things like that. I was always someone who was like, had an insatiable curiosity. So was always into something, whether it was like, starting this business or that business or paddleboarding. So I definitely kept areas of myself. But those were pretty critical developmental times of someone's life to be like in motherhood. And then psychedelics it's really interesting. I interviewed someone the other day and I asked her when she started psychedelics, and she's much older. And she said, I was assuming she was going to say before she was a mom. And she was like, well, not till after I was a mom. And I was like, oh, that's weird. And then I thought, oh, that's me too. So I basically, at some point, I had a daughter that was struggling with some depression in high school. And again, as a mom, it was like I was one of those moms that like threw everything at everything. I was willing to do anything. And basically was down like this big rabbit hole, like searching for other alternatives of how to support somebody and not just somebody, it's like your child. A lot comes along with that. Like it felt like the oxygen had literally left the house. And I remember just being down like this rabbit hole of like seeking, and came across a couple of articles about the use of psilocybin in depression. But again, we're going back years. Like this was not the psychedelic renaissance where like every time you open up the newspaper, there's a new article about how profound psychedelics are and how they're healing everything. So I definitely was like, okay, cannot use my daughter as a psychedelic experiment, and just kind of put it on the back burner. And she found her own way with lots of support. But I don't know what happened. 2 years later, I was like literally, it was like a vortex. All I could do was like read about more, like study it more, find out what is psychedelics. I had heard about ayahuasca. I couldn't even pronounce it. I was like, what is this? I knew so little, and just started really researching it. But my interest really was for consciousness. I think I was curious. I had a deep question of, can psychedelics give me more clarity than my conscious mind can? And at this time I had very, like, I would say mystical experiences without psychedelics. So I had this deep question after learning about Buddhist monks that had used psychedelics. And a lot of my teachers from ancient time to modern day had used earth medicines and psychedelics. And there was a part of me that felt so duped. I was like, what? Like, why not just tell us? And so then I just found myself really saying, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm curious about what this is going to show me about who I am in my life. And it was definitely more an exploration into like God. Who is God? What is this reality? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What was the first medicine you decided to jump into?
Ooh, it was, I thought it was going to be ayahuasca. And you know how people say, oh, when you call the medicine, it comes, but it didn't come. Ayahuasca did not come for a while. And my first journey was actually with 3 medicines, which was surprising. I just kind of trusted the medicine woman. And it was with MDMA, psilocybin, and 5-MeO-DMT. Actually, Bufo for a first journey.
Go big or not at all. Whoa.
Right.
I'm curious, like, what was your, cause I mean, even let's say, Bufo in particular, when I first worked with it, it was like, okay, I've done lots of medicines and there's nothing like this. What was your initial reaction after that experience?
Oh God. I mean, it was a wild experience because you put those three medicines together, and I'm not recommending that. Again, this is not any recommendation, folks out there, but you put those three medicines together, and MDMA is that empathogen, that self-love, and then the psilocybin comes on, and all of a sudden you're like, ooh, is there shadow? What is shadow? I didn't even know what shadow work was, literally. And I mean, so I do remember these areas of discomfort showing up in the medicine journey and just taking my mask off and looking outside at this beautiful day, being like, oh, isn't this beautiful? And the realization that I had a part that just wanted to bypass, which again, I knew nothing at this point about any of this. And I would say that first journey was, oh God, I mean, energetically, a Kundalini awakening, an absolute opening of oneness, unity, a deep understanding of parts of myself that I didn't know, like even the bypass part. Yeah, it opened up so many things and a lot of questions too. Like, what just happened? Like, what was that? Yeah. And I do remember at this one point having this feminine figure kind of looking down on me, and I had brought the medicine woman her gift in this beautiful wallet that I had bought with my daughter that had this snake on it, with which I would never have picked it out had I not been with my daughter, and this little stone in the mouth. And she took it and she put it on the altar. And now, as I'm in this incredible journey with kind of like that Kundalini energy, I look up and see the snake and just have the realization of how everything is so tied, the coincidences of life, how I got to this place, all of it, the codependent arising of all of life to take me to this moment, to experience this experience that was so beyond profound. I remember this feminine energy just kind of like taking up all of conscious space and really asking me to see myself as she saw me. And kind of being like, I don't really know what she's asking me for. And she just was patient and waited and waited and waited until I really had the dissolving into pure love and unity. And then the other thing that I saw, which again was like confusing, was I saw myself kind of as a medicine woman. And I know a lot of people have that experience, like, oh, I'm going to do this work. I was the complete opposite. I was like, wrong girl. You don't know my life. This is not me. And it showed me, which I must have known at some point as a child, that I had a long line of medicine people in my life. Like my mother's whole family were like pharmacists and medicine men and women, which I really didn't have any connection to until medicine. So that was kind of my first journey. And then it was like, oh my God, what in the world is that? What is this stuff? What is it showing me about myself? Yeah.
Wow. I love hearing these. Because I always say, even my first experience at 14, I remember the moment when I was like, wait a second, I think they're not telling us the truth about how powerful we are. And I remember not knowing who they was and what that even meant. But it was just that realization of like, wait a second, there's so much more. There has to be, because this tiny little substance produced this huge life-changing effect. Question for you though, because it's funny, this actually came up recently when I was helping out, holding space at a medicine ceremony. There were two parents there, and I, the next day I said, I'm curious if you tell your teenager. Did you tell your children what you were doing or where you went when you came back? Did they know?
No. And this is kind of an interesting part of my journey, because it's almost like the reverse, like the child parent that
Yeah.
Like, I was just
Hiding.
like, I want to like hide what I'm doing. And
Wow.
no, I didn't. And I wasn't even really that forthcoming with, my husband, because I knew it wasn't something he would really be fond of. I think I said I was like studying mushrooms. And he was like, "Are you going to do them?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I'm going to get there and see." Like, I'm not really sure. And then I think this was part of my journey too, actually. I think one of my deepest lessons from all of my journeys and this entire path is how to be truthful, how to be authentic. And I think what I learned, as many of us do culturally and within our own families, is to trim the parts of ourselves off that people might not accept, and kind of hide away those parts of yourself that aren't really aligned with like your particular social economic group or your family. And so I learned that in a lot of ways, that I wasn't necessarily forthcoming out of pattern of fear, pattern of not being accepted, pattern of being criticized, all that kind of stuff. And medicine just kind of kept peeling back those layers. Like, and you know what's underneath it though, actually, as I'm saying it, is it's like there's a part of you that learned through society or your conditioning on multiple levels. Like the you parts of you don't get to exist, right? And so what medicine has really taught me is every part of me gets to exist. Every child part story, all the parts that were beautiful and the wounded ones that got hidden away, and all the parts that I don't have to change who I am or what my truth is because someone else is going to have a problem with it. And then, so that I think was one of my deepest lessons. So eventually, yes, I started to talk about psychedelics with my children and my husband. And, it took a while. It took a while for them to be comfortable with it. As a matter of fact, it goes in and out still to this day. I think there's still kind of like, what do you do? What are you doing? Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. Because
It's so
again,
fun.
you're
Yeah.
going back to a time where it wasn't being talked about.
Yeah.
So now it's like, I don't know if it's just my world, but everybody is talking about psychedelics. It's everywhere. So that I was early on that curve. And so as it started to shift and psychedelics became everywhere, I would hear from my kids things like, one of my son's friends was here recently and said, "Oh my God, I loved your episode with Dr. Angelo DeLulla. That was really interesting." Or, my daughter might say, "Oh, so-and-so is really interested in this." And, so now it's kind of like, or I think this would be really good for so-and-so. She's struggling with this. So, and my daughter, who is getting her master's for rec therapy, I just noticed in Salt Lake City, psilocybin is secretly, that's what the article cover says, secretly available to certain hospitals there. So now it's kind of everywhere. And her therapist, I think, is now getting trained to serve MDMA. So as it's become like more normalized out in the world, there's definitely a much greater acceptance with even in my family and surrounding family. Like my mom like is a huge supporter. My brothers, it's really interesting. Yeah, that's amazing.
And I love like the possibilities there. And this episode so far, I want people to hear this because it's amazing, because I'm like you, I believe it's everywhere, but I still meet so many people who are hiding it from, even partners, loved ones, children, and I'm like, gosh, it's on like the cover of the Washington Post. It's everywhere now, but it still has that stigma. And I interviewed Rick Doblin this summer at Burning Man, out of all places. And somehow it came up in conversation around me doing my first psychedelic at 14 and how I said it was the best thing that ever happened to me. But I do remember, and I see the difference now with, like I have nephews that are teenagers and growing up in this today's world, and they know so much just from social media and then our culture. And then, yes, being in California, it's probably a little different than certain more conservative parts of the country. But I do remember at that age when I was given it, like, I didn't really know what I was getting into. I had heard about it and kind of just was like curious, and there was no one like to go to and talk to about it. You know, it was very isolating on some way. And I remember wanting to share with my parents or even my own brother, but then I was afraid to, and I was afraid of getting into trouble. And then, you know, it was like the fear, like the level of fear of like, this is dangerous, this is illegal. We grew up in the culture of like, this is your brain on drugs with the frying egg thing. But then I look back and I'm like, you know, kind of probably like your daughter, I was going through a really hard time as a teenager, and, you know, divorcing parents and being a teenager, and like a whole new level of like, I went from private school to a public school. And I look back and I actually think working with this LSD numerous times throughout that time period probably saved me on some level, because I was kind of heading downhill. But now I see, you know, the level of these conversations and maybe ability to even have an open forum inside of a family could actually be better for children, you know, because or you might end up like a child or someone, you know, having a bad experience or overdosing or not being informed or having to hide behind backs.
Totally.
I'm curious, when you interview other moms on your podcast, does this conversation come up around like navigating the family, and like, has it brought families together, or is it destroying families? Like, I'm curious.
Yeah, it's fascinating because, you know, I just recently interviewed someone who was in couples therapy, knew nothing about psychedelics, and the couples therapist said, do you guys want to try MDMA? They were pretty much at the end of the marriage. For them, it worked. There was like their marriage before MDMA, the marriage after, you know. I definitely see that. What I see is like a deep opening since psychedelics are being talked about more. Again, even in my own family, now that we're in a different time, you know, 5 years has changed things. 7 years has changed things dramatically. So what I do see is deep work being done by mothers with sons or daughters, or partners doing medicine together. I'm seeing families doing medicine together. And beyond the medicine, I think what I'm seeing is you asked like about the dialogue. Just lever in the psychedelic space anyway, and it maybe even take even out psychedelics, and you're talking about healing spaces where people are really talking about different ways of communicating, the understanding of trauma, of generational trauma, of intergenerational trauma, the importance of communication. I think there is, at least in the spaces that I'm in, more open and honest dialogue in general, which is beautiful. And I think when it comes to the mother piece of this, like, I'm always like, oh my God, do psychedelics before you have children. Like, do your work before you have children. Maybe do an experience with a partner before you get married, when you're having trouble early in your marriage, so that things don't build up. Use these medicines with somebody who can support you. And I definitely am someone who's probably leans much more toward the idea that psychedelics are not a magic pill. I was going to do an episode recently on my podcast that was going to be like the latest psychedelic news. But the truth was, it got so boring. I was like just flipping article after article about the profundity of psychedelics and the latest thing that they're healing. I don't think they're a magic pill. I think there's a lot of support and work around them. I think they can radically change who you are for the better. They can peel back unbelievable layers of conditioning from yourself. But all of that comes with deeper understanding and work. So the mom piece, I would say, why do I think you should have psychedelics before you have children? I think partly because, as we know, we are a ball of conditioning until we're not. There's that pre-mortal self, this perfect being that's born into the world that then is hit with like all this kind of conditioning and messaging and all of it. Like our own parenting, their generational trauma, all of it. And if we're not conscious of it, all it does is perpetuate itself from generation to generation to generation. And so when I say as a mom, like, I wish, oh my God, I wish I had done this when I was in my 20s or 30s, because I was coming to self-realizations after really, I mean, your children are conditioned by the time they're speaking to a large degree, right? So much of this is pre-verbal, or let's say even 7. I mean, I wish I had known aspects of myself prior to repeating some of the things that were just part of the way our parents raised kids. Like, it's no one's fault. It's like our parents did it. My parents were amazing parents. Like, I always say I could never replicate what my parents did. They were so loving and amazing. And there's always conditioning, and there's always things from society. So yeah, I'm like a deep proponent of go do this work. Go do this work as a couple before you even have children. Be conscious of what you want to create in the world, what you want to let go of from your families and bring forth, because I wish I had had that opportunity. I wish that when I was 23, 24, these conversations were being had. They weren't.
Could you imagine? Oh my God. I look at my family and I'm like, I mean, I feel the same way. My parents did the best that they could. They were not awful. They were great in so many ways. And there was so much intergenerational trauma that was just unprocessed and completely passed down. And I feel like I've spent my whole life trying to unravel it and, like reprogram myself. And I'm sure pretty much everybody listening feels the same way. So I agree. I mean, if I could choose the world, it would be like, okay, in order to get your marriage certificate signed, you have to have like at least a few sessions with, with support, with a, therapist or someone at least understands this. And yeah, go into it with a lot more consciousness. But, with MDMA coming online, they keep saying it's this year. I don't know. I keep hearing different rumors. We'll see. But actually, when you were talking, something that came up and I'm curious about, because I've experienced what I believe to be kind of this epigenetic, kind of energetic healing of some of these trauma patterns through certain earth medicines. Again, along with lots and lots of somatic therapy and integration work. And I've done NLP and I could go on and on. But there are times where I feel like, wow, that ayahuasca dieta just kind of like reset some pattern in my DNA that I feel like might be gone for generations to come. Maybe I'm wrong, who knows? But what are your thoughts on, let's say, like MDMA or ketamine, or I don't know, maybe some other like synthetic? Do you feel like they have maybe the same potential as, let's say, iboga or bufo, or even like high dose psilocybin? Do you think it's kind of all running in the same way? Like, even though it's scientifically different?
Yeah, I used to be like no, it has to be like earth medicine, no synthetics.
No.
And I guess I've changed my mind. I was very kind of like, oh, ketamine? No, it's a synthetic. And then I would do interviews with people who have many experiences with many psychedelics. And I would ask them, I think I asked Ben Malcolm, what has been one of the most profound psychedelics in his life, ketamine. And then another woman, like wasn't going to do ketamine. And then ketamine. I think ketamine goes both, though. I hear people do ketamine in the clinical setting, and I don't know. I don't know. I think you can do ketamine in a more ceremonial kind of slash setting, and I see better results. I was shocked by ketamine in the sense that and again, maybe I had done some of the clearing out of some things, but it was incredibly profound spiritual experience. Like, I was shocked. And I kind of felt the same about, I mean, the earth medicines do have something maybe slightly unique. I don't know, but I think they're all doing ultimately the same thing, which is reconnecting us to, as we just said, psychedelic soul revealing. I think they are ultimately all connecting us through our true nature and into this cosmic, like, earth that we are in, and to each other, and to the truths that, like, we've lost, really, in particular in Western culture. I go back and forth, but I think, like, ultimately they're both incredibly profound experiences. Like, how can you describe them? You really can't. And as you said, I've had experiences, and then with clients as well, where no doubt, generational trauma it's unbelievable.
I know.
And I would say, and I would love to know your experience, I would say that 5-MeO-DMT or Bufo, I know some people say that it's psychic surgery, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously, we have no clue how this is working. But that has, I think, profound potentials to move out on so many levels. Yeah.
I mean, I've asked every person I've ever interviewed about Bufo. I'm like, so how do you explain this? Do you think it's karma? Like, I really, the experience that I had my first time was, it was profound. And I really feel like it got into, like, my ancestry because I saw it, I felt it, I started seeing my reality shift, and I started having a lot of synchronicities around this particular aspect of my ancestry come in, like the following few weeks or few months after it. And then my subsequent ayahuasca ceremonies that following, like, 1.5 to 2 years were all kind of similar theme. Yeah. And it's like it opened this door where there was, like, this really deep healing on this kind of Jewish ancestry of mine that's only half of my ancestry. And it was no joke. I mean, it was, like, really heavy stuff, but it needed to come up to surface. And it felt like it was, I kept seeing visions of it. It was like so long ago, like, that there's no words for it other than, okay, there's something in the energetics of what's being carried from, DNA strand to DNA strand, like little, and it's like, how do you explain that? I don't know, but I know there's this healing that's happening. And yeah, and of course I'm doing the other work as well, but there's this energetic healing. And I do believe that some of these powerful medicines, iboga, which I've only microdosed with, I have not gone full in yet, but I do believe it seems to work kind of in the same way. I've seen people's lives get completely turned around from, this one experience.
100%. And when you're talking about the family, right? First we have, like, the individual and the family, and then you're talking about generational trauma. I've seen the same thing, and I had the exact same experience. And it didn't matter what medicine I used. The generational trauma it was basically my father's family. I don't even know if I've gotten into my mother's family yet, but my father's family. And it kept showing a similar theme that needed to be healed. And as you said, I love to tell people, like, this is not easy work. Like, this is no joke, as you said. But I do think it is a way of clearing out families and for future generations. Honestly, if you're more connected, I reflecting on myself, even in the last 1.5 years of my own personality, right? I was looking back thinking, like, wow, I could be so defensive, even with my kids, like, and I've just have felt like, even in the past year, like, what is there to defend? Like there's, like, undefended and authentic and undivided within myself. I think that's, and I remember saying even in the last few months, like, wow, I've never felt so not compartmentalized, undivided, able to handle what emotions are coming. And there's some hard ones, life is constantly changing. So Yeah, I think that it's generational trauma. And I also think the other piece that it gets to is you mentioned your, Jewish lineage on one side. It's also, you get in contact with the collective. It's
Big time.
like, which brings on just this, idea of we're not separate. We all have similar wounds, and we're all in need of being seen and loved. And, it definitely brings on another layer of how we show up in humanity, I think.
Totally. Oh my God. Yeah, we could talk about this for hours. And I get it. And I agree. I mean, it's an interesting time to be alive, right? And to be in this work and witness people and what's surfacing. And yeah, it's, I wish I could say that, oh, these medicines just healed things in my ancestry. But my God, some of the things I had to go process through for years and years were like very hard to sit with and hard to hold. And I'm still working through them. I mean, there's just, different layers that come through. But I've seen how it's affected, my whole entire family and me, and just the way I show up in the world and the way I be in the world. And I do like to think this is partially, or wholly maybe for the collective as well. I mean, because there is no separation of it.
Mm-mm.
But I'm curious, you have this podcast around psychedelic mom, psychedelic motherhood. Your audience, do you get a lot of moms writing you, like sharing, oh my God, I'm so glad I found this, and it's been so hard being a mom? Like, when I interviewed Tracy, who's doing the microdosing moms movement, she had some good points about being a mom in this day and age today is like no joke.
No joke.
It's probably a lot harder than, I mean, not to say it was ever easy, but maybe back when I didn't have social media, thank God it was maybe a little less hard, even though it was still really hard. Who comes through the psychedelic mom, and what is the feedback around it?
It's interesting because as a mother, as I said before, like I've always had like insatiable curiosities in so many areas. So it's been interesting. Even the title Psychedelic Mom, I went back and forth on so many times because I feel like I'm more than just a mom, right? And I'm catering to an audience really surprisingly that has a ton of men listening and a lot of people that are not moms. And I am continually saying like this, yes, I am trying often to elevate all voices, whether it's mothers, women in the space as well, but really anybody. We're all so deeply connected. I do hear from like parents, definitely. I definitely hear from equally fathers and mothers saying like it is really hard to raise children. I hear from people how they had an experience with psychedelics and it radically changed how they viewed their parents, themselves. And as you said, there is this kind of it's hard to understand this energetic healing around even our own parents. So I get a lot of people talking about psychedelics. There are people still hiding that they're doing them. But, not only just psychedelics, I have a couple calls with people doing this work in general. I do a lot of somatic inquiry with clients and really using the body as the deep psyche. We don't always need medicine. And what I'm noticing is that even so many years ago to now, the shadow's right on the surface. Like it's right there. It's like you don't even need psilocybin sometimes, and the shadow is with the eyes closed right there to be healed. But my point being that even that work, sometimes I'm noticing partners hiding with each other, not just even medicine work, the fact that they're actually doing like inner child work, which is amazing. But I do find that, yeah, mothers are like, oh my God, I'm so glad I found you. And I'm so glad you're doing this. And I'm so grateful for these conversations. And dad's the same. And again, it's not just for parents either. I get a lot of people just really interested in the topics of awakening, of consciousness, expanding the topics to like biohacking and longevity. And, because we were talking about what does it mean to live a psychedelic life? It's not just about psychedelics. It's about living a soul revealing life, an integrated wholeness. Like, and what is integrated wholeness? It's like the bio, psycho, social, eco, relational aspects of ourselves. To be truly living a psychedelic life is to be living in alignment to our bodies, our minds, our soul's purpose, our relationships, all of it. So that's what excites me, is like all the different topics, and also kind of diving into I feel like there's also another side of psychedelics that I want to dive into, that I don't know how you're feeling, but there's this part of me that feels like the oversaturation of the positivity of psychedelics in media, the FDA giving breakthrough status to, MindMend and Cybin. There is this part of me that's like, ooh, what's going on here? I might want to like peel some sequins off of the psychedelic renaissance a little bit and talk about like, is there something deeper going on here? Psychedelics have been used for incredible healing, and psychedelics have also been used for mind control. And so I want to go in lots of different areas.
Yeah. There's always a dark side.
Right?
Yeah. And it's interesting because I just interviewed someone talking about that, about some of these psilocybin studies, which, some of them it's like studied on 10 people and 4 of them had negative experiences. And I'm like, well, they only report about the 6. And it's like anything in life, there's always, we can't put this up on this, glorified pedestal. I do think there's a lot of great benefits. And I believe there's certain medicines that are not good for certain people.
Mm-hmm.
I believe you have to have some certain level of, somatic therapy or integration coaching, or someone that knows how to help you through the process, because just taking psychedelics isn't gonna fix it on its own.
No.
Because I always make jokes, we'd all be Jesus, right? Wouldn't we be Jesus by now?
Same with the family work that you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
So if you're a family and you decide to take MDMA together, that could be incredibly profoundly healing or not. Kind of depends on where everybody in the family is and whether you have someone to support you if some issues came up that you couldn't navigate together. But I do have hope. It's interesting, when I got into this and then into the Psychedelic Mom podcast, really it was this idea of like, wow, do like deep family healing, And what I'm noticing is my family of origin is the one suddenly really curious and diving into deep work, where my family, my children, my family here, I don't know if we're quite there yet. It's in process.
One step at a time. Yeah, it's interesting. And I was just talking to someone about that recently too. I'm like, if you pay attention to the work you're doing and take care of, first yourself, it's like the oxygen mask thing. You start to see those around you start to shift and change. Like even my own brother, which I've just always said we're on polar opposite sides of life. There's some meeting that's been happening. Like he's coming onto a new path or starting to think a little differently and starting to open up. And I'm like, I haven't even done anything. I've never pushed anything. I've said like, the invite's open, but that's it. But, it's like, I remember when he took up running, and I remember being like, wow, because I used to be the big runner. And he's like, I took up running. And I was like, whoa, that's huge. And it was like life-changing, But it's that same thing. It's like that. And I do believe on a larger scale, it's like if all of us are doing our own work to become more compassionate humans, to really do our own healing and our understanding of our own patterns, our own unconscious ways of being with each other. And then, having a little more compassion for all those around us, maybe we could learn how to have world peace one day, maybe if we start to see the perspective differently. And so I do believe that. But I agree. It takes work, it's like, you have to be willing to dive into the dark stuff, the icky stuff, the shadows, the layers underneath, and maybe see things that you weren't ready to see. Although I believe whenever you're shown something, you're ready to see it. It's just, maybe it's like, hard.
It's interesting too, because for any of your audience members that haven't done this work, right, who are listening today, even before I got into this, if someone had talked to me about like trauma, I'd be like, oh, trauma? I don't have any.
Yeah, I used to say that too.
Inner child work?
I have no trauma.
Why would I do inner child work, right? So you just mentioned your brother, and it's interesting. Similarly, I had a brother kind of recently be like, what do you do? I mean, I kind of know what you do, but what do you do?
No one knows what I do.
And I was like, and I started to explain, and he was like, whoa. It's so interesting because I have two brothers who, and as you said, like just not the type that would have done this work, period. Like just no need for it. Why would you? And I heard from, one of my brothers recently, like, oh my gosh, I've listened to No Bad Parts like 3 times now. I get what you're talking about. I was like, hello? Who is this? I mean, really? And then another brother, wanting to do medicine and wanting to do medicine with his partner. And so I'm just seeing these major shifts around me. So that's kind of interesting. And I think the other thing that happens, and I don't know if you feel this, sometimes when you're on this path and you're doing what you feel like maybe your life has been allowed to do, this is your work, that life aligns. And so my sister even said to me recently, who is someone who helps influencers and things like that, right? And she said to me recently, like, I feel like I've always been flowing upstream for some reason. And how, like, it seems like everything for you is just going downstream. Like you just like, even you said, where do your clients come from? I don't know. I just don't know. It's just like, I don't know. I just feel like incredibly lucky, and there's an ease or flow because there's some alignment going on. Mm-hmm. And so she even said to me, what if I took your True Nature program? And I was like, sure, let's do a trade. Why don't you do my True Nature program and you can help, build the brand. And she was like, I'm in. So that all happened like last week. And I'm like, this is fascinating because again, it's like, it's that mycelium web. And when people are ready, it shows up for them. And, I still like, as I said, like the Psychedelic Mom, when you first started, you were like, oh, we're going to talk about Psychedelic Mom stuff. And I'm like, ooh, mom stuff. I mean, it's tricky. I'm still working on those you're constantly working on your relationships and who you are. And I said to you, I try not to talk about my kids because I try to protect their privacy. And they didn't say like, hey, let me sign up and have a mom that's a psychedelic mom. So
must make good stories for their friends though.
Yeah. Oh my God. The behind the scenes of the Psychedelic Mom is actually a comedy show.
But that's where I say like, wow, how cool would that be if like growing up with a self-aware mom that actually cares, that's doing her own work. And I mean, it's just so polar opposite of my own upbringing. And again, my mom did the best she could, but she's just so far removed from any of that. And when I see my friends who are in the medicine world with their children, they do seem to have a different relationship with their kids. Mm-hmm. They seem to be much more open, authentic. I mean, no, they don't tell them every detail yet, especially the younger ones, but there is a certain kind of, this family unit, and then the dynamic is so different than the way I was brought up, which was like, just, it was like a very highly traumatic household of like, walking on eggshells, and you don't say certain things. You don't, if you feel a certain way, there's no one to talk to about it. And it was just like survival, it was pure survival. And I used to think the same thing, even when I started working with medicines on a ceremonial level. Someone mentioned the word trauma to me, and I was like, I don't have trauma. I'm here to make my life better. Right. I remember I said that. I was like, no, I just want to make things better. And then I'm like, I don't have trauma because I wasn't like beaten. I was provided for, like I grew up middle, whatever class. But looking back, I'm like, oh my God, there's been so many levels of trauma. It just manifested in a different way.
Well, it's interesting. I see a lot of highly successful people who have everything in life. And, it's really interesting. The wound of performance, the performance wound is so huge.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think people realize that. It's like, no, I grew up like this and this and this and this, and I succeeded and I'm successful. But when you stop and when they actually have medicine or do somatic inquiry, there's a child in there that feels unseen, and that maybe that love was transactional, that they were loved for being this or that or this.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had a couple men clients recently.
Same men. I've had some of those too, and it's a pattern I've noticed. They've had all the success, and it's like they're subconsciously, because I had a client a couple of years ago where I was like, how much of this is you trying to please your father who's not even alive anymore?
Mm-hmm. You know what the hard part is? Yeah, like whoa, is when, whether again through somatic inquiry or through medicine, they contact and feel the physiology of the child that felt it. I had 2 clients recently that hit that, and they basically, again, don't stop. Life is constantly moving and traveling and doing. It really took them down for a couple of days. And they were like, wow, that was so brutal to see that my child felt so kind of unseen and needing to like perform to get love. It's shocking.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's a huge part of my family. It actually was, it was very conscious too. It was like school, grades, the programming around, you are here as a human to go to school and get a good job and buy the nice house and have a nice lifestyle, and then you die. And I remember, and it's funny because that's actually part of my whole entire, my life, my soul's journey, my soul's path of what I'm doing now is to help people break a lot of that patterning. But I remember at a young age being like, that doesn't make sense. Like, is that really all this is about? And I remember and then when my dad actually died, kind of maybe 15, 20 years prematurely, I was like, wait, he just lived that life. Like he lived the performance, based, like I'm here to succeed. And then I retire, I have a nice lifestyle, and then I die. And he died early. And it was like, it jarred me into like breaking that pattern. Cause I was like, wait, I know there's more than just having to like check off these lists or perform in order to please, or in order to, have our needs met of being loved and being seen and accepted by our families or even society. And I see that probably like you too. I get a lot of clients coming to me, especially clients that come out of the corporate world or maybe even doctors, nurses, people who've been, successful in their careers, and they hit the midlife and they're like, wait a second, like this isn't authentic. I'm not happy. A lot of times they're depressed. Very often they maybe have that jarring psychedelic experience where they're like, something's got to change. And it's been such a pattern that I'm like, well, wait a second. I actually think a lot of this, especially here in the US, I think it's a big thing. I mean, compared to maybe some other parts of the world, where the root of a lot of our depression, our anxiety, our disconnection is living this lie of like, trying to be seen by being successful. And here's the thing, you can still be successful and be 100% authentic to yourself.
Right.
It's just the amount of people that are misaligned. And I do agree. I mean, in my experience, it's definitely been a lot of men, which is fascinating. Like, and I had a client, 2 years ago, year and a half ago.
And men that don't usually do this work.
Yeah.
Like, it's not the hippie clientele that you're like, well, yeah. But it's like really curious about psychedelics and doing this deep work. It's fascinating.
Yeah. But I think this is where I start to see some hope, where I'm like, well, it doesn't mean you have to quit your job as a CEO or an executive. It just means really living a more authentic life. And I do think there's people that are genuinely happy being a successful doctor. And then there's people that are genuinely happy being whatever, a healer or whatever it is you want to do. But I think it's about the authenticity. And I keep having these visions of like, well, what if all the leaders in our world like actually walked on this path of like really knowing themselves and their intention behind why they do what they do, and maybe there is a little like reshuffling. But then if everybody was living in that kind of, like you said, the psychedelic lifestyle of like the soul alignment, I mean, I really do think we'd have a happier world. I've said this for years. I think it's at the root of a lot of the problems is like just constant misalignment and like, you know, the swimming against the stream and struggling when it's like, you know, there's actually an easier way.
Right.
And it's actually just as good or even better.
Totally.
Better. Usually better.
Without a doubt. Like, bar none. Every single solitary client that I have, and if there's one thing, you know, how you're like, feel like, I don't know how, because it comes through me. It's nothing like I think that I do in any other area of my life, but something happens with a client and there is not one person that their current reality of what's going on in their marriage, in their relationships, in their career, that is not related to their childhood. Right. And potentially the generations. So what makes me hopeful is here we have these tools that are fast trackers. And again, I say they're not magic pills, and yet I see magic all the time. I see magic every time, really. So like I say it and I'm like, oh. So here we have these tools that really expedite a process of deep healing that isn't easy. We both acknowledge it's not easy work. But when you can have the opportunity basically to tie something that you can't even see yourself. So I'll just see something. I'm like, oh, that's the 5-year-old. Oh, that's the 3-year-old. Oh, that's the relationship that they saw their parent have. Oh, that's the time that the father did this and they don't realize how traumatizing it was. So all those ties become so apparent. And when you talk about creating that peace inside that comes to like our true nature, I look at it like this. Those wounds are the obscuration to seeing the truth. So that conditioning and our wounds, all of us, those are the veils. Those become the thinking patterns, the patterns of behavior, the job that doesn't serve you, the relationship doesn't serve you. What this work does, what psychedelics do better than anything I've seen, is they show you the particular wound or the particular pattern of behavior to kind of clear that veil. And so once that happens, as you said, the layers come down. Why wouldn't we want our leaders to do this? Why wouldn't we want them to actually, because what we're seeing out in the world is childhood wounds projected onto the world by our leaders. That's what we're seeing.
Yeah.
And so if we could, as leaders, as parents, as teachers, whatever your role in life is, do your own work. At the bottom line, there's the Heart Sutra is a Buddhist text, and there's this one line in it that's become like it's like this line that in medicine I'm like, there it is again, and it's to be freed of delusive hindrance and all the suffering that comes of it. And each of us have our own delusions. We do. It's our conditioning. It's not ways of seeing ourselves that we don't know. And I do believe that medicines have the capacity to peel back the layer and help us see what's might be hard to see.
Oh, I have hope. I really do. One day at a time for this world, one day at a time. But Michaela, I'm so glad you're doing this work. And it's so good to finally bring you on. Now, I want to leave you a moment to share about anything coming up. I know you have your podcast. We're going to link to that and your website here in the show notes.
Yeah, I would say just come to the podcast. We're expanding topics. Let me know the topics that you really want to hear about psychedelics, about parenting or biohacking, whatever. As far as my own work with clients, I'm totally full right now. I have a new program that I'm doing that I will open up, and it's called True Nature. And what I've done is I've curated kind of all those areas I was talking about before, the integral approach of life, like your mind, body, heart, soul, relationship. So it's kind of this portal that I've curated and created videos for. I have that. And it's more close intimate relationship with me where I provide calls, content, and, medicine if needed in, legal places. So yeah, right now I'm kind of full, but stay tuned.
Awesome. And we have to hang out one of these days soon.
I know. Come to Newport.
I know. Come
hang out.
Let's hang. I know we've been saying this for so long, but I'm actually trying to leave space this summer. I really am.
Me too. Yeah. Thank
so
you,
good
Beth.
to have
Thank you for the work that you're doing.
Oh,
yeah. Thank you. You inspired me, by the way. I wouldn't have started a podcast without you.
Oh my God.
Not a chance. You were so generous to just like.
I think I remember, I think I was like, yeah, do it.
Right.
Here's because everybody I meet that is thinking of it, I'm like, here's the person, just go do it. Because it's, I think we need more discussions and education stories, and it's also a lot of fun. Like, because look, we
really
get to hang,
meet people from all over.
Love
so
it.
much fun. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for coming on.